3 million people had been forcibly displaced from their homelands, more than at any time in history, and 35 million internally displaced by war, civil conflict, gang violence, weather catastrophes, and political oppression. Now, 100 million refugees around the world have been uprooted, scattered, and struggle to find safety, clean water, food, and healthcare, vastly exceeding the capacity of the numerous NGOs dedicated to help them, and the capacity of the largely poor countries receiving them to accommodate them. What response is required from the global community, and what are the prospects of our meeting this moral challenge? A native of Argentina and a citizen of Switzerland and the US, Carina Black has lived in the United States since 1987. She earned her BA in journalism and MA in political science at UNR, then received her PhD from the University of Nevada, Reno in 1997 in comparative politics. She is the founding and current executive director of the Northern Nevada International Center, NNIC. Under her leadership, the NNIC has hosted 500 international visitors a year in a variety of fields, including Supreme Court justices, legislators, beekeepers, providing them training and insights into American ways. The program also has a language bank and provides interpretation and translation services to schools, local courts, and medical institutions. In 2016, NNIC parlayed its established relationship with the State Department into establishing its own Refugee Resettlement Program and began resettling refugees from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, Syria, and El Salvador. Since 2016, NNIC has resettled almost 500 refugees, victims of trafficking, unaccompanied minors, and asylees. In 2017, the Alliance for Victims' Rights presented Carina Black and her team at the NNIC with the Humanitarian Award. Dr. Black's research interest lies in democratization in Latin America and Africa and in US public diplomacy. As an adjunct faculty member at the University of Nevada, Reno, Black has taught courses in global studies, world politics, comparative politics, democratization in Latin America, international organizations, Pan-African politics, and Latin American politics. Whew, that is a great introduction. So Dr. Black, I will turn it over to you. Please take it away. Just so you all know, Dr. Black is going to do her PowerPoint presentation. You can put questions in the chat, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end of her presentation.
Thank you so much, Leah, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. It's good to be with friends from Unitarians. We have worked together for such a long time, and I've just been so pleased to be a friend of UUFN for many, many years. So I'm going to give, as Leah mentioned, I'll give a quick PowerPoint to kind of go over some global numbers on displaced people, and then talk a little bit about what resettlement looks like in the United States and in Nevada and here in Northern Nevada, and what we can expect from the government in this year. It's been an incredibly crazy couple of years with the Afghan evacuation and then moving directly into the Ukrainian situation. So I'll give a quick 20-minute or so talk, and please put your questions in the chat, or we can just talk after I'm completed. So give you a few numbers here. As Leah mentioned, the total number of displaced people in the world is actually now around 90 million folks. And we generally split up people into refugees, who are people who leave their home country because of fear of persecution, and they flee to a second or third country. Internally displaced people who stay within the country but have to flee their community or their city because of the same fear of persecution. Then, of course, we have a very large number of people who seek asylum in another country, like our friends at the southern border. And that is an established right under human rights law, that people have the right to present themselves to a government because of fear of persecution. And a little bit over 50% of all people who are displaced are actually children. So just a definition of what a refugee or an asylee is and what they have to prove in order to receive refugee status. So it's someone who's forced to flee because of persecution, war, or violence. And the reason why they're fleeing is for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. In the United States, resettlement has a very long history. A friend of mine always says it's about 500 years long, our history of resettling refugees. But officially in the United States, the government created the Resettlement Program in 1980 as a consequence of the war in Vietnam. And since 1980, we have resettled about 3.7 million folks, which is the highest number of any Western country. Of course, most refugees are hosted by the developing world. They're not very few get lucky enough to come to the United States. Here in the US, resettlement is a public-private partnership between the government and these 9 agencies that you see here. There's actually under the 2023 fiscal year, there's going to be a 10th, what we call them VOLACs, voluntary agency. But we don't know yet who that's going to be. So right now, there are these 9 organizations. The blue one on the right, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, USCRI, is the national agency that NNIC is affiliated with. The largest resettler is the Catholic bishops in the United States. And the second one, I believe, it kind of changes frequently, is IRC, and then U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants is the 3rd largest. To give you a little bit of an idea of what resettlement looks like, when the government established the resettlement program in 1980, it set a floor of 50,000 people per year. And the president actually gets to make what's called a presidential determination each year on what the target should be of how many folks will be resettled to the United States. Most of the time, those numbers have been pretty high. They have been in the 50s. And actually, during the Reagan years, in the very beginning of the resettlement program, and in the Bush years, the numbers were as high as 200,000 per year. You see, in the last administration, those numbers fell very, very quickly. So if you look at the 2016 numbers, we were asked to become a resettlement agency during that time. And right as we started resettling our first refugees from Syria, the numbers started coming down very significantly. If you look at the 2021 number, we only resettled 6,000 folks in the whole country. And I'll go a little bit into future 2020 and 2022 and 2023 numbers to give you an idea of where we are going as a country. In Nevada, there are 3 refugee resettlement agencies, 2 in Las Vegas and 1 in Reno. The Catholic Charities and Ethiopian Church are the 2 resettlement agencies in Vegas. And actually, a majority of folks that come to the Las Vegas offices, and especially Catholic Charities, are Cuban Haitian entrants. And if you know a little bit about history, Cuba has a special relationship with the United States, and they have what's called a wet foot, dry foot policy. So Cubans who come to the United States and are entering the country, they are actually receiving benefits just like regular refugees. The other categories that you are seeing there are SIVs, and those are folks, special immigrant visa holders. Those are folks who helped US military in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, over the last year, we've seen the number of SIVs pretty high because of the Afghan evacuation. And then there is asylees and also victims of trafficking. Those are folks that have a foundation of a letter from Health and Human Services that shows that they have been trafficked, either labor or sex trafficking. And NNIC is actually the exclusive grantee of the Trafficking Victims Program in the state of Nevada. Just to go over some additional numbers. So when President Biden came into office, he faced a situation where the entire pipeline of refugees had been decimated due to the previous administration not really showing a lot of interest in resettling refugees. So their intention for fiscal year 2021 was to resettle 65,000 people or refugees under the traditional refugee category. But we resettled only about 19,000. However, after the evacuation in Afghanistan, we actually evacuated 110,000 people, and that was a mix of asylees. So basically, people ran to the airport when the Taliban took over last August. And American servicemen really took it upon themselves to just load them into airplanes. And then they took those people to different US military bases in the Middle East, in Europe, even in Latin America. And from there, they took them to military bases in the United States to do more vetting. And then they distributed about 80,000 of those 110 to different refugee resettlement agencies. Here in Northern Nevada, we resettled about 150 Afghan evacuees. And the challenge with Afghan evacuees are many. One is that the evacuation was so haphazard, and it caused a lot of challenges because we literally have 16-year-old boys who just got jumped on a plane without their family. We have a woman with a mental disability who got on that plane all on her own. So many very challenging situations where people just kind of try to flee the country as quickly as possible. The other challenge with Afghan evacuees is that the government did not give them an actual immigration status. They gave them a temporary asylum status. So we are currently in the process of seeking asylum for all those what are called humanitarian parolees. And the government has been looking at doing what's called the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would eliminate that long process and very costly process of seeking asylum for these folks that literally our own government transported out of the government. So the other issue, the final challenge with Afghan evacuees is that many single men were evacuated, and their families, including women and young children, continue to stay in Afghanistan under extremely difficult situations. We have fathers who are telling us that their wives and children are moving from family to family member in Afghanistan every couple of days just to be safe and flee Taliban from uncovering where the father actually went. And you can imagine the incredible hardship of a father who knows that his family is not safe. So we resettled many of those guys who basically went to the airport to look for a safe passage and were swept up and put into an airplane. So in essence, the Afghan evacuation is now over. The government is promising to look for families and try to bring them to the United States as actual refugees. But that process is going incredibly slow because we're now also, of course, have the government created the United for Ukraine program, U4U. And unlike most other refugee programs, this one is managed through the Department of Homeland Security. And DHS has received over 120,000 applications from US sponsors who have Ukrainian family or churches who want to sponsor Ukrainians. And unlike most other refugee programs, this is sort of a private way of Americans being able to sponsor a family member to live with them. And then they receive the same refugee services as most other refugees. Here in Northern Nevada, we have about 80 families that have sought this type of humanitarian parole again. And in the state of Nevada, it's about 700. Give you some more numbers. Again, the president just set the presidential determinant for next fiscal year, which started yesterday. And his determination is at 125,000. And of course, continuing those Ukrainians that have applied for under the United for Ukraine program. Hopefully, we will also begin to see refugees who are family members from Afghanistan. I should say that last year, the presidential determination was 65,000, and we only resettled 19,000. This number of 125,000 is highly unlikely that it will be met because refugees go through a very long vetting process. Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 10 years. And what happens in this about 15-step process is that each process expires after a certain period of time. So if you do a biometric check, which might be step 5 in the process, that biometric check then has only a validity of 2 to 3 years. Same with medical checks, Facebook, social media checks, all kinds of vetting processes all expire, which has resulted in the refugee pipeline to be almost empty. So this number of 125,000 most likely will not be met. I want to be sure to kind of talk a little bit about how NNIC operates and if UUFF is interested in partnering with us. When we first started in 2016, we worked with many different churches and had different congregations adopt families. And we've kind of moved to a different model now where we have a case management team and we have volunteers who provide different kinds of services. So if you wanted to sign up as a volunteer, our case managers would integrate you into one of the WhatsApp groups. And a WhatsApp group is basically supporting 1 or 2 families. And the case manager will say, child X of family X needs to go to a dental appointment on such and such date. And the 5 to 8 volunteers that are on that WhatsApp group can then just claim that spot. And we found that system, because WhatsApp is a very global and international kind of platform that folks know around the world. So it works really well for us. We have also a number of different jobs. As many of you know, we are affiliated with the University of Nevada, Reno. So all of our jobs are through UNR. We currently have a housing specialist open, a health coordinator. And so if you're interested in a job, that's where you would go, is to the UNR website, HR website. The refugee volunteer teams are those folks who take people to different kinds of appointments. We have an online ESL program. We have a lot of moms who are stay-home moms. They have children. And so it's really easy to provide ESL support via Zoom, or some people also do it in person. We have a refugee youth mentor program, and we were just lucky to finally hire another refugee youth advocate. So a refugee mentor basically is somebody who meets with a refugee youth about once a week or once every 2 weeks, and just provides general support. I'd say that our major gaps in service provision and in funding from the federal government, but mainly in sort of a local gap in services, is mental health support. We have many clients, as I mentioned, who arrive with severe PTSD, having been evacuated under very challenging situations. We also find that many of our clients have never seen a dentist, and we are dealing with a dental crisis almost on a daily basis. So pretty much all of the financial support that we have received, we're using for dental emergencies. Just we're pulling teeth out wherever, whenever we need to, because as I'm sure you know, the dental situation in the United States is pretty precarious. And that is my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and happy to answer any questions. So the first question is why the resettlement rate dropped during the later years. Not to get too political, but during the Trump years, as soon as we became a resettlement agency, the Trump administration implemented a Muslim ban. So that eliminated Syrians, Afghans, pretty much many of the most critical populations, and eventually eliminated almost all different types of refugees to come to the United States. There is a literacy council, the Northern Nevada Literacy Council. We work with them pretty intricately. They also have a program for ESL and leading to naturalization. So after 5 years, our refugees are eligible to become citizens, and they have to take the citizenship test. So we work with Northern Nevada Literacy Council, with TMCC, Adult Basic Education, and with an organization in Carson City called ESL in Home. And during the pandemic, we also created our own ESL online program.
I had a question, Dr. Black. What are some of the major barriers or issues that people face once they get here, or some of the most common challenges?
Right. Well, housing. We face obviously an incredible housing crisis in Northern Nevada and in many parts of the United States. During the Afghan evacuation, we were super lucky to have the generous support of Airbnb. Airbnb Foundation gave all refugee resettlement agencies free access to housing. So because we were getting so many clients at a time, we were able to take advantage of Airbnbs for them for the first 1 or 2 months. And then just finding housing that doesn't double in cost within a year or so. Many of our clients entered into 6 or 12-month leases. And when those leases were up, they were told by their landlords that the rent would be doubled. And it's just been incredible, because Northern Nevada is actually has one of the highest rates in rental increases. Transportation, we lack a good public transportation system. So while we can get great jobs for our clients, anywhere from Tesla, Panasonic, Patagonia, many different companies, but they're all, they're not like contained in the city of Reno. They're all kind of outside of the public transportation routes. So that's typically an issue. Last year during the bus strike, we had to Uber our kids to school because we couldn't find ways for them to go to school. And even now during, if you have kids in school, you know that Washoe County was providing bus service for the kids every couple of weeks. Now they're going to resolve that problem. Again, lack of mental health challenges, lack of dental support. But other than that, I would say refugees are the most amazing and resilient people. I can't think of a population that I would love to work with more, because they have been through such a difficult time, and 95% of the time things work out. They face these challenges, and they understand that life in America is not what they had heard it would be. It's not easy, but they get that pretty quickly, and they're resilient. We have families that have 2 or 3 people in the household working, and once that happens, we know those families are going to be okay. Yes, we do actually work very closely with Reno Bike Project. We have a memorandum of understanding with them where they actually provide internships for some of our youth. And in return, we can get bikes from them, as well as we have a good partnership with Kiwanis. And so, yeah, bikes are amazing. And especially in Northern Nevada, where we don't have a great public transportation system.
Carina, what mental health services have you been able to arrange? I would imagine the need is great.
The need is incredible. So our office is right above one of the mental health providers, and of course their name escapes me right now, but we work with various organizations, and our main medical provider is HOPES, which is a federally qualified health provider. They can sometimes refer our clients. However, our clients are most of the time need interpretation, and most mental health providers are either unable to work through an interpreter. For example, we have a young woman who was evacuated from Afghanistan, and she needed to be she needed to be in a clinic where she could be supervised around the clock, and we could not provide that because none of the clinics would be willing to work through an interpreter. So it's quite limited. So, COVID vaccination, absolutely. It's a requirement of any refugee, humanitarian parole. All Afghans were vaccinated on the base when they first came, and refugees also have to be vaccinated as part of the resettlement program. And Bob's asking about community integration, helping refugees become part of our social community in Reno. We would love to spend more time on that, and unfortunately have to work on mostly just the critical services and employment, housing, education, health, English as a second language, and all of the basic services. We have a World Refugee Day every June. We hold a big event for our community members and refugees to celebrate really the resiliency of our community. And we are launching a program I'm really excited about, which is a refugee monthly kind of restaurant where some of our clients are going to be making food, and will sell the food at one of the venues that we are working with to make sure our community gets to know refugees. But I would say to Bob's point is that most of our clients integrate through schools, through educational opportunities, and they are able to gain community also by, we have many refugees that live in similar apartment complexes. And so the American immigration journey is both challenging and oftentimes very disorienting. But I think we could do better when it comes to social integration. As soon as we have more staff, more funding, and we are able to focus on some of those areas. Has UFN shared the plate with your organization? I think we just did. Dr. Murphy, was that a share the plate support that we just received?
I think so, yes.
Okay, yeah. So thank you. Yes, we have done that once or twice. Bob's asking, how are refugee children being accepted within our public schools? Any problems with severe discrimination or rejection? We have a liaison in the Washoe County School District who works very closely with us. And I would say, in general, the answer is Washoe County has done quite well with supporting the integration of our students. There's 45 schools. We have 137 students at 45 different schools. Every school is different. Some schools go out of their way. The principal comes and gives the tour themselves when our new clients come and enter that school. Some schools are not so great, but we are working on educating school officials about the very special needs of our clients. Is there a dental association in Reno that could be approached to see if some dentists will provide pro bono services? Yeah, we actually now have one of our health team members. We have 3 people on our health team is working exclusively on touching base with dental associations that can provide support. We are actively seeking more dentists that can provide that kind of support. There is a mosque, and they are involved very heavily kind of our go-to folks whenever we have severe challenges. I'm on a speed dial with the head of the local mosque because they provide so much support and partnership with us. And Raz is saying, I know some refugees need help with driving practice. They're ready for their driver's test. So yeah, we actually recently had a car donated because we have volunteers who want to help folks with driving, but they didn't want to use their own car. So now we have a car that we can use just for helping our clients drive. So if you are interested, but want to be sure your own car doesn't get damaged, you can contact us and we'll just ask for your insurance information, and then you can you can borrow our driving car to help our clients. And we have, I should say, there is a church in South Reno called Hope Life Church, and they raised funding for especially our Afghan families, and they gave each family a $2,500 payment once they have their driver's license to help with down payment or have support buying of a car, because it's such a critical thing. So we've used all the 75,000, and many of our Afghan clients are now driving.
Carina, I asked a question about your funding and what do you get funding from the state, the feds, and Congress?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one.
No worries.
We receive funding through two different sources. The first source is the U.S. Department of State. So regular refugees receive an initial funding of $1,100 to each individual and $1,100 to us. That $1,100 is to be used for housing and for, it's just a one-time payment. That funding covers the first 90 days of refugees' arrival in the United States. And after the State Department funding runs out, we receive funding from the Department of Health and Human Services. That funding has increased quite significantly during the Afghan evacuation and now for United for Ukraine. So it's temporary. So we've had a pretty good size bump in our budget. It's all federal funding. We do not receive any funding from the state, nor from the university. So I would say our agency is about 90% federally funded at this point.
Can I do a quick follow-up on that? Is that fairly common for resettlement entities to not receive state funding?
That's a great question. So yes, most funding for refugee resettlement does come from the federal government. However, I know from my colleagues in Oregon and California, a little more of the liberal leaning states, they're quite generous in supporting refugee services. I would say that it's the exception rather than the rule. It's actually quite a complex question. When the resettlement program first started, it was sitting in state governments, and at some point, state governments were allowed to opt out of being involved with resettlement, and Nevada, Texas, and a handful of other states opted out of participating in refugee resettlement. And the biggest resettler in each state then became the official refugee agency. So in Nevada, Catholic Charities now manages all of the health and human services funding from the federal government, because refugees, because the government didn't want to be part of it anymore. Thank you, Leah, for putting up the spreadsheet. Roz is asking about donations of furniture, household items. We have come to a point where all of our Afghans, the high number of Afghans have now permanent homes and housing. And we are seeing a slowing down of other types of refugees, as I've explained. Ukrainians do not require furniture because they're generally living with a family member. And so we are downsizing our donations right now. So we're not looking for any kind of furniture and other items right now, because we're just trying to provide all of the sort of long-term services that our clients need. So at the moment, no. Did I miss any other questions?
I'm just scrolling back through the chat now. Oh, I had asked if individuals are allowed to volunteer, spare rooms for housing to help with that need. But I imagine there's some rules and regulations around that.
Yeah, actually that is a possibility. We have some of our single Muslim females that were evacuated from Afghanistan. We have them staying with home hosts because they need that little extra love and support. So yes, we have those kinds of hosting situations.
Cool. Any other questions from our group this morning? Jeff, I just saw you pop up on screen. Did you have a question? It appears not.
No, it's just weak Wi-Fi in the church library. I keep fading in and out.
Oh, I see. That's understandable. Well, wonderful. Dr. Black, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you, everyone. Oh, we did get one more question in there from Doro. How does Christmas? Oh, I think Doro may have been typing and meant to enter more words there. Needs around Christmas or the holidays? Are there extra needs anticipated?
We haven't gotten to Christmas yet. As you know, most of our families come from Muslim countries, so the Afghans, they may not necessarily celebrate Christmas, but I think we'll have a conversation. We usually do something around Thanksgiving where we make baskets for all of our families. And so I'll have to get back to you on our plans for Christmas and what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, excellent. Please keep us posted, especially on ways we can help, filling those baskets, either with goods or spending time helping fill those baskets.
That would be great. Yeah.
And one more from Bob in the chat. Any thoughts about the causes of forced immigration creating refugees?
Causes. Well, one of the big discussions within refugee resettlement and global migration is this idea about climate refugees. And I find it quite fascinating that the traditional refugee community does not want to create this integration between climate refugees and regular refugees, so refugees for political persecution or war or conflict. And I believe that the numbers of climate refugees, so those are folks in Africa, Asia, Central America, those numbers are going to be increasing so drastically that our system of support is going to get overwhelmed. That's kind of one of the major trends that is being discussed in the global refugee communities. I think in addition to climate refugees, the increased conflict around the world will also cause many more refugees to attempt to flee. And I wonder every day if we're going to go from an Afghan evacuation to an Ukrainian support system, and where is the next conflict going to be when we have, of course, still so many conflicts that are brewing, including the Rohingya that are fleeing to Cambodia and Vietnam, many other folks from Africa that are fleeing across the Mediterranean. So I hope that the developed world will continue to provide as much support so that the burden of refugees and crises caused by conflict and wars are not just borne by the developing countries. So the poorest countries supporting the refugee crises doesn't seem like a great system of supporting the most vulnerable people in the world.
A lot to think about for a Sunday morning. Yeah, I think the climate refugee issue is that's interesting that there's that internal conflict, that folks wouldn't want climate refugees included in that category of refugees. Right. Yes, agreed, Rosalind. Thank you for a great presentation, Carina, and lots of opportunities to contribute and volunteer. And I'm sure you'll hear from many of the members in the UUFNN again. I'm sure you'll be part of the Share the Plate in the future one more time. And with that said, I don't see any more questions in the chat and no one raising their hands. So yes.
It's good to see familiar and new faces. Thank you. Hi, Roz. Hi, Bob.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you at services, likely at 10:30.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye. Thank you.